Immediately, we are in the middle of the sermon, actually, kind of smack dab. And so we're starting in Matthew chapter 6, starting in verse 9 through 13. And it's really weird how the structure of ancient poetry and scope, they have what they call a chiastic structure, in which there's a connection between and they both work toward a middle, and sometimes climax is at the beginning, at the middle. And if we're saying that the Sermon on the Mount is the kingdom of God, and that it is a distillation of the gospel, the middle is really important, because the middle of the Sermon on the Mount is prayer. And the Lord's Prayer in earliest times was called the Proto-Evangelium, which means the, or no, I'm getting it wrong. It was something else that's the Proto-Evangelium. It's the Summa Evangelium, which is the summary of the gospel. In other words, the whole gospel, they say, or the whole Jesus, is summarized in the Lord. Now, I wouldn't really agree with that summarized in the Lord's Prayer, but there's a lot of it that is contained really quickly, which is in the past I have done sermon series which you just talk about the Lord's Prayer for weeks on it, because you can't do that.
I think you were doing Lord's Prayer when I met Franny.
Wow,
Oh,
I think, yeah,
okay.
that sounds right.
Well, and because I know through the teaching of the Lord's Prayer for me, I'm not doing the whole thing. I'm just doing a 1-week summary of some of the interesting parts.
You're doing the middle part of it.
I'm doing the middle part of the middle.
The middle part of your teaching.
I'm doing okay. So talk about the Lord's Prayer. That's kind of what we're covering tonight. So rather than and I'm going to kind of the bigger sermon series, and I'm going to distill it down into a nice little bite-sized thing. It's going to be one teaching instead of so. All right. But it is good to know that the whole of the gospel is found in. Go ahead. It's found in the Lord's Prayer. So let's go ahead and read this. And if I'm making a light, it's because I'm not actually feeling very well. I'm going to blame it on that. So I feel like I haven't quite as much as I should have. Really kind of on that. So, but I'm just going to, any mistakes that I make, I'm just going to blame it. So there we go. So if somebody could read Matthew 6, verses 9 through 13.
Right. This then is how you should pray. In heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth. Give us our debts, and we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation.
So Linda, I'd like you to look up the Matthew 6, 9 through 13, and I want you to read the one that you've got in yours.
Are to pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily breads, and forgive us our debt. Forgive our debtors. And do not subject us to the final test, but deliver us from the evil one.
Okay, all right. So this is a little different. You notice that the common end, or yours, the kingdom and the power and the glory, isn't contained in either one of those versions. And that's because that was added on centuries after this. It's actually based on the text in Revelation. And it was a common thing in the church to have at the end of the Lord's Prayer, to have conclusion at the end of the Lord's Prayer, or to at the end of prayer in general. And so they just went ahead and put the more common one, and they just, that's not part of the original text. That's how come you don't find these texts. But if you read the King James, and they're going to have for thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory, they're going to have that as a thing. But it's because it's in the majority of texts, but it's not in the earliest texts. Okay, so let me just say a couple things. First of all, the Lord's Prayer is not original. It's actually it's a distillation of a larger prayer that we talked about last time, called Colossians. That was common prayer that was said in synagogues all over the world. And it's longer. There's kind of a shorter version of it, and it has a couple things in it that aren't included in the 18 benedictions. But you can definitely tell the language and all that is drawn from the longer prayer. The problem is the 18 benedictions, the form of it that we have, which is from something that's probably not the original of the 18 benedictions. We don't know what that is. We don't have that the Lord's Prayer and the 18 benedictions were from an earth have access to. And so that's just something interesting. In the Lord's Prayer, certain twists in here that are clear. Benedictions has your kingdom come. It has your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. It has away from temptation, but it doesn't have the line about forgiveness. It doesn't have some of the other lines that the Lord's Prayer has. So
No little zingers.
no little zingers, because Jesus was all about the zingers. All right. That I want you to note about prayer. Now, a lot of times when we pray, and a lot of prayers that are in the Bible, there are portions of the prayer which are praise. Okay, little portions of a prayer which have praise in it. And back in the Bible, you can see that this is because of the way that people used to talk to emperors or kings. Anytime a person went up before a king, they were going to make a request. They would make a statement of the power and the glory of the king. You usually start that way because you want to butter them up, so that way when you ask them something, then they're feeling good about you. And that's the way you have it. You want to see some of that. Look at the book that Daniel talks to kings. Check into Abednego. Even when they're disobeying a king, they are still praising the king when they know how to pray. That's the way. Now, interestingly enough, the Lord, which is kind of unique in the prayers of the Bible, has no praise. There is praise in the Lord's Prayer. Now, the addition to the Lord's Prayer, for thine is the kingdom and power, and a statement of praise. It is a statement which states. But the Lord's Prayer, the original prayer that Jesus says, has no praise in it. Now, a lot of people think that that the second line, you have our Father who is in your name. A lot of people think that is a statement of praise. It is not. Like all the other statements, all the other sentences in the Lord's Prayer, it is in the imperative form. And that means that the entire Lord is made up of commands. The Lord's Prayer is to God, from us to God. And I just want us to think for a minute the difference between how Jesus talks to powers and how like anybody else talks to powers. Jesus, when he's talking to, let's say, a demon, he just says, "Shut up, get out of there." He's very direct, and we would kind of say rude. Jesus is quite, and he does the same thing. Jesus talks the same way to his Father. He's kind of rude that way. Just a guy who really got to the point. And if we remember here in the Sermon on the Mount, the Lord's Prayer is in a place being put where Jesus is saying, get to the point. Don't say a lot of words. Get to the. And so what Jesus is doing here is he's setting, there are commands in the Lord's Prayer. That these are commands that are being directed toward God. Now, the thing is that usually when you have a prayer, there usually is a command. Now, if we are going to make a command, we would usually soften it by saying please, or, I know this is trouble, could you please do this? We would soften our commands, but really, when we are asking somebody of something, it's still the imperative form. We're still kind of, if we took away all soft language, okay, any soft language, he says, "Our Father in heaven." That is a address. That way, everyone knows who we're talking to. Father on earth. We're not talking to somebody, another spirit in heaven. We're talking to our Father in heaven. That's who we're talking to. So now we know who we're talking to. Now we're going to start telling what to do. Okay, that's the Lord's Prayer, is telling God what to do. And so I'm hoping that kind of makes you uncomfortable to say the Lord's Prayer, because I feel like it really, that we need some, because if I'm talking to God, I just want to say, Lord, please do this. Okay, Lord, could you please do this? Now, most people, when they look at hallowed be your name, so that way you can do that, but that isn't imperative. It does not say, Lord, may your name be praised. That is not.
Or your name.
It doesn't say
Which
that.
is
either.
what, I know,
Yeah.
but I'm saying if it were a statement of praise, it would be, your name is holy.
Yeah. And so it's not saying that at all. What it is actually is make your name holy.
Show up.
And well, it's even more specific than show up is in the next line.
Get those infidels.
But make your name holy. And so look at it, that the Lord's 7 commands and the Lord's 7 imperative statements in the Lord's Prayer. Okay, the first 3 are all directed toward God. Make your name holy, come, make your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Those are 3 connected and directed toward God doing something for the sake of God. And the other ones are all commands that have to do with us. Give us this, forgive us our debts, don't lead us into temptation, deliver us from evil. Commands having to do with us. You're looking confused.
Not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one as one. But that's
The
just-
reason I say that is because I'm in Greek, sentences
do
generally
this
begin with. So when I'm talking about statements or complete statements, I'm talking about statements that have a verb, a complete verb, and so make holy, come, and give us, forgive us, do not lead, deliver us. Those are those 7 sentences.
You kind of
Of
see
the
where
Lord's
those
Prayer.
2 are 2 different things too.
And that's the thing is that they are related
Well, they're
because
a do
there's a,
this instead of that.
because
Yeah.
there's a but in there. So the but means that there's two sentences that are related, but because two verbs, then there are two imperative commands, and that's why I'm saying it that way. Anyway, and so it's split up. And interesting, I find it interesting, just like how we have the two main commands that Jesus says are split up between God and we love God and we love human beings, and even between commands that are directed toward God and commands that are directed toward interaction between human beings. Then the Lord's Prayer is also split in that same way between statements that are directed or that are about God and statements that are. The most interesting thing I think about this are because we are three statements we are praying for. And I don't know of too many prayer books and all that say, okay, first thing you need to do is pray for God, because God really needs your prayers. Everybody, come on, let's pray, except for Jesus. Jesus says, okay, everybody, first three things we're going to do is we're going to pray for God, because God really, really wants our prayer. Never heard anybody say that. But Jesus says it. Jesus says it right here. Jesus is saying, here are three commands that we have. The first one, hallowed be your name, means God, your name or your nation is being sullied, is being destroyed, and you need to make it holy or make your reputation. And so the context for that is found in Ezekiel chapter 36, where God talks about that Israel people inside, especially inside the temple, had done all this idolatry and evil inside the temple. So God had to punish them. And so all the world looked at Israel and said, oh, see, your God is weak, because look at how he's being destroyed by these other nations. And God says, but that's not true. The fact is that I called these other nations to punish you. Mm-hmm. And in the whole process of this, my nation was made unholy. I have a bad light of the nations. And so I'm going to sanctify my name. I'm going to make my name holy by the land, by giving you a new heart, and by establishing a new covenant with you. That's the whole thing in a nutshell. So when we are sanctified, make your name holy, or hallowed to be your name, so those all mean the same thing. Then what we are praying is, God, your reputation. We have probably screwed up your reputation. It is looking at the people of God and seeing how they do not represent God. Looking at the people of God and seeing that they don't represent God, but instead they represent their own interests. And so it's a for God to come down and to clean things up, especially to give his people a new heart. Give your people a new heart. And we're not doing it, we're not saying, God, you come down and do it for our sake, instead do it for your sake, because your reputation, see that in our land right now, just how the reputation of God is being sullied of his people and the things that he is doing and saying. There are all people, I think that now a height in which people look at the church and they talk about how hypocritical. I think
that'd be a depth.
Possibly a depth. Yeah, reached. I think that it's as I've ever seen about how hypocritical the church is. And the fact is that what we are doing when we are praying is we're saying, God, we are hypocritical. Really screwed up your reputation. And it's our fault. Please come down because we don't want your reputation to be screwed up anymore. That's what we're actually praying. Come down and fix our hearts, fix your people, fix your church. And we're not doing this anymore. And so that's that prayer. So it is not, once again, it is not a prayer of praise. It is a request God to fix his reputation because his people have messed that up. And so I think that this prayer, probably more long time anyway, is really very necessary for us to pray. Okay, but once again, this is a promise that God that he would bring to earth. We are not asking for go to heaven. Instead, we are praying for God to come and change the world, for that, and we're doing it once again for God's sake. Why? Because he made this promise. So we're saying, your kingdom come. Come on down. Make things better. Put the world to rights. And then when we also pray your kingdom come, we're praying for your kingdom to come to experience. And that happens partly through us or God, and partly through seeing, healings and people poverty and despair. And then your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Once again, God, your will's not being done. You want people to love each other. This is your command. Your command is for people to care, love each other. That is not happening. Definitely not. But it's your will. Well, come on down and do this. I find this section really interesting because so many people, God has completed us on the earth, and Jesus is saying right here, God not only doesn't have control over what happens, we have to request God to make it happen. God does not have on earth unless we ask him to. This is why prayer is so important. From the very beginning, Genesis chapter 1, God has given over the whole earth to humanity, and humanity has screwed it up. We've done the most great job as far as using the authority that we have. And God is at a place where he's saying, I want this. I want to help, but I gave you guys the authority. You guys have the authority. So unless you ask me, I'm not going to come down and fix it. You need to come and ask me, and then I'll come and fix it. And Jesus is saying, let's ask God so that way he can do what he wants to do. Because until we open the door, he's not coming in. Isn't it funny? Because a lot of times we keep hearing from different sermons, well, we don't, God is at the door. We need to ask him to open the door so we can come in. No, it's the other way around. God wants to come to earth and fix the earth. And we have to open the door and let him come into the us. We open the door. He's not coming in. We open the door is through prayer. So it's really important that we pray that we come down and fix things. That we have to invite God to come and take over some of our sovereignty, because we are the ones who are in control, and we have to give his sovereignty back to him. He gave it to us. We have to give it back to him. And we give God through prayer. Give earth back to God through prayer because he will not forgive us. God loves us. He will not rape us. That he will not force his. He will not be good. He will not force us to do what is right to each other. But if we invite him, then he will send his spirit and great things will happen. Okay. Okay, so that's the first section there. And so the second section of the Lord's Prayer has to do with us. And it is interesting. It's interesting that this section actually goes back and relates to the Beatitudes. Give us this day our Beatitudes. Blessed are you who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Hunger is a big theme in Jesus. That's a major theme. And here we have in the Lord's Prayer, Jesus saying, is recognizing, okay, you guys are hungry. You're going to be hungry sometimes, and you need to ask God to give you bread. This is such a huge deal. In fact, there's going to be a whole section coming up in this. Jesus is talking about is going to provide for us so that way we don't get hungry. We'll later, so we're not going to cover it in detail now, but just the one thing I do want to say that is here that isn't in any other place is the daily. Jesus is asking us to pray for bread for today. Not our bread for next. And the fact is that what we tend to get anxious, and we want to cover all the stuff that's going to happen for weeks in advance, so that way we don't worry about it. And what Jesus is doing is he's saying, okay, no, you're going to pray for your needs for today. God's going to provide it today. Where do you think he gets that from? He gets that from way back in Exodus when God gave manna. He told them at the time that he gave manna, and I'm going to provide food for you. This food is going to be here, and you'll have plenty of food for today, but don't eat for tomorrow. Don't save it for tomorrow. Just keep it for today, and then I'll get you more tomorrow. Just trust me. Trust building thing that God establishes with his people, that he's only going to give enough for a limited time. And this is a discipline for us. Okay, it's a huge discipline. Because of course we get way more food than that. We get way more stuff today. Okay, and we really love to prefer, we really kind of plan our lives around doing things for long. We don't have to worry for stuff. But we all know day by day. And they don't know where they're going to get their food today. Okay, well, where are they going to get their food today? From those of us who have enough food for today and tomorrow. The thing is that what God did, the pattern that was established in manna is a person would go out and collect enough for them and their people. So whether that be family or disabled people or whatever, they would go and they had a particular measurement that they would have for them and their family and their people. I would provide plenty for them. If anybody had excess and they kept it till the next day, then it would get spoiled and then bad things would happen. Okay, so collect for the day. If we have more than we need, then what he's doing is he's giving us enough for us and for others. So it isn't, God is not giving us extra so that way we can store it just in case we need some the next day or something like that. Instead, we're supposed to be taking it for ourselves and it to others. That's the pattern that God has, which is why, I mean, for those of us advocates, we receive a lot of stuff. I mean, we get a lot of stuff, and frankly, stuff that we can provide for distribute.
Right.
We get more stuff than we can distribute. We do the best we can. But this is why, for me, a lot of times my principle is, let's get it going. Let's get this out of here. Let's give it. Let's get it to them now. Because and not think, oh, well, somebody else may need it more later. No, I've received this today. I didn't receive it to next week or to give it to somebody else who might need it more. I just need to get that kind of thinking out of my head, because all that ends up doing is I end up saving too much stuff.
Right, it just goes bad.
And it goes bad.
Yeah.
And then
I feel terrible when I throw things away. So it's like, oh.
That doesn't mean that I don't give stuff to people who don't need it, or give stuff to people who are going to waste it themselves. That's not good either. But if I know that somebody needs it, I don't want to say to myself, oh, well, but what if somebody else needs it? And I do that. Do you ever do that? I do that a lot. I'm like, well, but what about this?
Yeah.
I need to stop.
I don't think I'm as a burden to me to have it. A greater, but when I'm passing it out, I sometimes think, well, I can get two, and maybe someone who's not here, I might. So yeah, I do that too.
I do that. I do that way too much. Oh, I'll give them this, but
It's partly just because you're responsible. I'm not as responsible as you are. That's really what it is.
Well, if that's the case, then Jesus is teaching us to be a little less responsible. It's just like, move it on, give it away.
I think there's a lot to be said for being not responsible.
Yeah,
I
I
really
agree. I agree. Okay, so give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our debts as we've also forgiven our debtors. We talk a lot about forgiveness. I mean, forgiveness is a huge thing for Jesus. And he has another statement. Right time on it today. We're going to just do the whole kit and caboodle next week. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so we're really not going to talk very much about forgiveness, because forgiveness is way more complicated than we think it is. Or at least what Jesus says about forgiveness is way more complicated than how we talk about forgiveness. Well, today, that thing is what Jesus is talking about when he says forgiveness. In that teaser, that's the whole thing next week. Okay. 13. Do not lead us in temptation, but deliver us from evil. So let's talk about temptation for a minute. Temptation does not mean temptation. It's actually one of the worst translations in the Bible. Modern scholars continue to translate it as temptation, is simply because of tradition, and nobody wants us to say anything other than temptation. Now, Linda, look at Matthew chapter 6, verse 13, and read that to us.
Subject us to the final test.
Okay. Doesn't say temptation.
Mm-mm.
It says test. Because they wanted to listen to the language instead of listening to tradition. Okay? Because test is a translation of the Greek word that is in this, that is in here. Temptation is a very poor translation. Why? Temptation gives the implication that you are being tempted to sin. And that's not being talked about here. It is a test. test of our faith. We are begging God not to have our faith be tested so much that we fail, that our faith, that failing in our faith. That's what's being talked about here. Jesus gives us an example of that kind of temptation when on the night, and he's telling himself and his disciples that all of them are going to be tempted that night. Tempted in what way? Well, it's a test. It is a test that they're being put through. It is a huge trial that they are facing. And some of them are going to succeed and some of them are going to fail. Okay, all disciples are going to fail. All of them. Jesus told them, all of you are going to me. Every one of you are going to run away from me. One of you is going to betray me. And Peter, sucks to be you. You're going to deny me 3 times. Okay? But he says, you are all going to come back except the guy who betrayed me. And so when you come back, this is what you need to do in order to obtain forgiveness. And so the text is telling his disciples, beg God that he wouldn't put us through this time of test. And at the same time, Jesus says, go through times of test. Well, this really sucks. Why do we do this anyway? Then if Jesus is telling us that we're all going to have to face it, the kinds of trial and persecution, these are all the same kinds of things. These are the tests, the things where people say, give up your faith, or we're going to cause you to suffer. Give up what you believe in. Give up your life of love. Give up your devotion to God. Give up walking for the sake of or living for the sake of people who are in need. Give them up, or else we're going to cause you to suffer. Jesus is saying, beg God that you never have to face that, but you will. Going to come. So then you go, why are we even this? I guess to reduce the amount of time. The other thing, that's why there's 2 commands in this, and they're kind of 2 parts, which is to deliver us from evil. And so the evil both means evil from outside. In other words, evil coming to attack us, to cripple our faith, but also the evil inside of us that will cut the weakness inside of us, that will give in to that. That'll cause us to not continue to follow in the way of Jesus, to not continue to love people, to not continue to stand with the poor and the helpless.
And I can think of a reason to pray it, especially pray it on a regular basis, which is that when it happens, you will recognize it. It will make you more able to stand, because you'll say, hey, tested here.
Yeah. And I think that's exactly right. I think he brought us, just like he did with the disciples on the night before his arrest. He said, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. Pray that you may not enter into the test, because he knows how. And so this is just right here in the Lord's Prayer, is a constant reminder of how weak we are, of how easy it is to forget it. It's not worth it.
I think about all of the guys down, all their possessions so vulnerable to one another, and how they're constantly tested. If somebody's gone for the day, just go over stuff and no one would ever know it was you, or whatever. And there's just, it's like that constant, and their need is so great, and talk about the devil having his way if they steal from each other.
So there, once again, there's a lot there that does summarize. It really is. It is interesting to note that that in the early church, people would only get baptized once a year. I mean, in other words, anybody who wanted to get baptized, you would have to wait until Easter. You wouldn't get baptized any other time of the year. And the reason is because they would through a year-long catechism, and every single person, when they went through catechism, there were basically three things that they had to be taught about the Lord's Supper and about the importance of the Lord's Supper, what Lord's Supper means. They had to be some form of the so the basic story of Jesus and all that, and they had to be taught great detail about the Lord's Prayer. And in the early church, you didn't take the Lord's Supper and you didn't recite the creed, not pray the Lord's Prayer until after you were baptized.
I never knew that.
And that's because those three things that were they weren't things for people in general.
And memorize it if you weren't allowed to
Like pray it in
just
public.
say it.
Maybe.
Could be praying for everybody else.
Yeah, I'm like,
But,
wait a minute,
yeah.
that would be really,
Everybody, so they would have detailed teaching. And so everybody got taught the Lord's Prayer before they got baptized, so that way they would know what it is that they're praying. I think it is a huge error nowadays. A lot of people, Lord's Prayer, they don't have any. And I think that's really what Jesus is doing. He's every time we pray, remember these things. We're supposed to remember what that this is all about. It's a recital. It's a constant reminder for us about what living in Jesus is all about. That living in Jesus is about restoring God's people. Living in Jesus is about following God's will and about God's kingdom coming through the Spirit. That living in Jesus is making sure that we have enough to share with everybody else. Living in Jesus is about forgiveness. Living in Jesus is about the constant trials that we and recognizing our weakness and the Spirit's strength to us get through that. And so sorts of things that we're supposed to remind every time that we pray the Lord's Prayer, find most of us aren't even taught, even know what it's about. So that way when we recite it, we don't know what
And when you recite it too, it's easy to stop hearing it.
It can be, which is another thing about the Lord's Prayer. One last thing that I want to say about the Lord's Prayer is that Jesus never prayed the Lord's Prayer. Jesus prayed the Lord's Prayer, but almost every prayer that Jesus said is based on something in the Lord's Prayer. He didn't use it as a recitation. He used it as a model for which to pray other prayers. So he would pray, Father, glorify your name, which is a form of hallowed be your name. He would pray, not my will, but yours be done. That which is in the Lord's. And you can see in John, there's a lot of prayers that he prays in the book of John, and they're all based on the same prayer. And so Jesus didn't often pray these exact words the way that we are taught. There's no problem praying the exact words, but he went beyond them. He would use them as prayer things, which is a great prayer. Can be used as words to pray, like we saw in Romans chapter 8, where it says that we don't have words to pray, and the Spirit prays for us through the Lord's Prayer. So words in the Lord's Prayer, we know, and we are praying the right thing. better way to pray the Lord's Prayer is to take the ideas of the Lord's Prayer and pray them in our own words. I've got like a dozen different versions of the Lord's Prayer to keep it fresh and put in context. And take these ideas that are in the Lord's Prayer, put them in, and say them to the Father, because that's the teaching for tonight.